So welcome to this deep dive, everyone. I want you to imagine that you're hired to design an absolutely impenetrable state-of-the-art security vault.
Okay, sounds like a fun thought experiment.
Right. But here is the catch. You are given one rule, written in stone, from the absolute highest authority. Under zero circumstances are you to ever leave a key near this door.
Which makes sense for a vault, yeah.
Exactly. And the consequences for breaking this rule are severe. Like, they will last for generations. So you agree, obviously, the rule is absolute. But then the very next day, that exact same authority comes up, hands you a shiny brass key, and tells you to hang it right on the front of the vault door for literally everyone to use.
I mean, that is just completely baffling. It makes absolutely zero sense.
It makes no sense at all. You, the listener, are probably thinking this is ridiculous. But today we are exploring a text called Nehushtan, the evolution of the graven image. And it actually proves that this exact psychological paradox has been playing out in human history for thousands of years.
The contradiction is just, well, it's staggering. It really forces you to question the very nature of absolute rules. Like, why would an ultimate authority command you to blatantly violate the most important law they literally just handed down?
Yeah, and our mission today is to trace the lifespan of this single, highly specific ancient object. We want to see how a divinely ordered creation eventually, metastasizes into a forbidden idol that ultimately has to be violently destroyed.
And we are looking at some ancient foundational biblical texts for this, right? Specifically from Exodus, Numbers, and Second Kings, but then pairing those with a really provocative piece of modern commentary.
Right. And what the lifespan of this ancient bronze object tells us about our own human nature is, honestly, it's deeply uncomfortable. So to really understand the tension of that moment, you have to look at the baseline rule itself, which is laid out in the book of Exodus.
Yeah, chapter 20, verses 4 and 5, which establishes the Second Commandment. This is a massive foundational moment for the ancient Israelites. They have just left Egypt, and Egypt was a culture that was absolutely saturated with physical representations of the divine. I mean, gods with the heads of jackals and birds and cats.
Right, everywhere you looked.
Exactly. So the Israelites are stepping into this new identity, and the rule they are given is utterly radical for the ancient Near East. The text specifically mandates that they shall not make a graven image, nor any likeness of anything in heaven, on earth, or in the water.
The sheer scope of that ban is just wild to me. No statues of eagles, no carvings of fish, no representations of humans or animals, period. It leaves zero loopholes.
None at all.
And the text doesn't just give the rule, right? It gives the motivation and the consequence. It says, you shall not bow down to them or serve them, because the Lord is a jealous God. And the punishment for breaking this is visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation.
Which is incredibly harsh.
Very. To put that in modern terms, God is essentially saying that if you carve a little statue of a calf and pray to it today, your great-grandchildren will be the ones paying off your spiritual debt.
Right, and that severity, I think it speaks to the psychological danger of the act. The divine in this context is meant to remain formless, completely uncontainable by human hands or, earthly materials.
Right, because once you put it in a box, it's not infinite anymore.
Exactly. But worshiping an invisible, abstract concept imposes a massive cognitive load on the human brain. It is just mentally exhausting to pray to something you cannot see, touch, or conceptualize physically.
Oh, absolutely.
Humans naturally seek a physical proxy to lower that cognitive load. We desperately want a tangible object to direct our focus toward. So this absolute immutable law was designed specifically to short-circuit that human instinct.
To keep them from falling into the idolatry of the surrounding Canaanite cultures, right?
Yeah.
Which makes the events that follow so utterly baffling.
Yeah, the pivot is pretty extreme.
Because just a bit later in the historical timeline, we jump to the book of Numbers, chapter 21. The Israelites are wandering in the wilderness, and they are miserable.
Very miserable.
And, I mean, we've all been there to some degree, right? You get exactly what you asked for, which in their case was freedom from slavery. But the day-to-day reality of that freedom is so uncomfortable, so lacking in the predictable comforts of the past, that you find yourself complaining about the very thing that saved you.
Yeah, they enter a full-blown crisis of faith here. The text details them speaking against God and against Moses, asking why they were brought out of Egypt just to die in the desert.
Right, they're starving, or at least they feel like it.
Well, they complain about the lack of bread and water, and they specifically state that they detest the, quote, miserable food they're being provided. They are literally rejecting the entire mechanism of their salvation.
And the response to that rebellion is swift and just incredibly visceral. God sends venomous snakes among the people. The snakes bite them, and a large number of Israelites die.
It's a terrifying ground-level punishment.
Yeah, and it snaps them out of their nostalgic complaining real fast. They immediately run to Moses, admit their fault, and beg him to pray for the snakes to be taken away. Right. So Moses prays, and God offers a solution. But the solution sounds like madness.
Total madness considering the rule they just got.
Exactly. The Lord tells Moses to make a snake, put it up on a pole, and anyone who is bitten can look at it and live. Moses actually crafts a bronze snake, mounts it, and it works.
The profound pivot here is the method of salvation. I mean, the Israelites are dying from venomous snake bites, and their cure is a physical representation of the exact creature killing them.
Wait, this is like a parent laying down a strict zero screen time rule in the house. But then the next day, the child gets a terrible scraped knee or a terrifying medical diagnosis, and the parent just hands them an iPad.
That's a great analogy, actually.
Right, because the screen isn't the actual cure. But it forces the child's brain to look away from the pain and the panic long enough for the doctor to administer the real medicine. But even with that logic, Moses is explicitly commanded to forge a bronze sculpture.
Yeah, he is.
He is making a graven image of a creature on the earth. How does that not instantly trigger the generational curse they were just threatened with?
Well, the distinction lies in the function of the object versus the nature of an idol. Think about it. When a person is traversing a desert and venomous snakes are attacking, their biological instinct is to look down.
Right, you stare at your feet to see the threat.
Exactly. You stare at your feet, you stare at the wound, you are completely consumed by the immediate earthly threat. The command to look at the bronze snake forces a radical physical and mental shift. They have to lift their eyes. They must look upward, away from their suffering, toward a divinely ordained remedy.
Oh, wow. So the bronze snake breaks the cognitive loop of despair.
Yes, it acts as a specific momentary tool for salvation. The bronze itself contains no magic, no inherent divine power at all.
It's just metal.
Right. The healing comes through the act of obedience. It's the conscious decision to look up and trust the bizarre instruction they were given. The object was a vehicle for their faith in that one specific critical moment in the wilderness. It was a utilitarian instrument, completely distinct from an object of worship.
Okay, so Moses makes this life-saving tool, the crisis eventually passes, and they move on. But, human nature abhors a vacuum.
It really does.
You don't just throw away the exact physical object that saved your grandfather from a horrific plague. You pack it up, you carry it with you, and you preserve it. But what happens to a physical object when it is inextricably tied to a literal miracle and then just stews in the hands of human beings for centuries?
Well, that vast stretch of time brings us to the core evolution mentioned in our source title. We fast forward to the book of Second Kings, chapter 18. This is during the reign of King Hezekiah, and we are talking about a gap of 7 centuries here.
That is an immense amount of time.
Think about how humanity today treats an artifact from the 1300s. Now imagine that artifact is believed to be the literal instrument of God's salvation.
Right, so Hezekiah is orchestrating this massive religious purge, basically. The text notes he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, which in this context means he is violently enforcing that original absolute rule from Exodus.
Doing some heavy religious house cleaning.
Exactly. He is systematically tearing down the rogue, unauthorized worship centers across the kingdom. He removes the high places, which were these elevated outdoor altars. He shatters the sacred pillars, which were stone monuments dedicated to male deities. And he cuts down the Asherah poles, these massive wooden symbols representing a Canaanite fertility goddess.
He is completely purging the nation of foreign idolatrous influence.
But amidst all of that cultural demolition, the text drops a shocking detail. Hezekiah also demolishes the very bronze snake that Moses had made.
Yeah, that's the kicker. And we learn 2 crucial pieces of information here. First, over the centuries, the artifact acquired a name, Nehushtan. And second, the text states that up to that very time, the Israelites had been burning incense to it.
I have to admit, I feel a deep sense of empathy for the Israelites here. Can you really blame them, though?
Well, it's understandable.
If I knew, historically, that my ancestors survived a terrifying plague because of this exact bronze statue, I would absolutely revere it too. I mean, we build massive climate-controlled museums to preserve far less important things in glass cases. Looking at that bronze snake and feeling overwhelming awe seems entirely natural, not malicious.
And that natural inclination is precisely the psychological trap the text is exposing. Reverence, or preserving an item for its historical significance, is one thing, but the text specifically notes they were burning incense to it.
Which means something very specific back then.
Exactly. In the context of the ancient Near East, burning incense was not merely creating a pleasant aroma, it was a deeply ingrained act of supplication. It was how you fed, summoned, or petitioned a deity. It was an active, daily devotion. They weren't maintaining a museum piece, they were treating the bronze snake as an active god capable of granting favors.
So they crossed an invisible boundary. They moved from saying, this is the incredible tool God used to save us, to believing this piece of metal inherently possesses the power to save us.
Yes, that subtle generational shift is what the author means by evolution. The artifact completely morphed from a historical God-ordained vehicle into a cultish idol. The Israelites made an incredibly common cognitive error. They mistook the vehicle of salvation for the source of it.
Oh, man.
Going back to your opening analogy, they took the brass key that opened the security vault, hung it around their necks, and started worshiping the key, completely forgetting the authority who handed it to them.
That was a perfect way to put it.
And because that reverence had metastasized into idolatry, Hezekiah had no choice but to destroy it. By calling it Nehushtan, which essentially translates to just a mere piece of brass, he deliberately strips the object of its perceived mystical power before smashing it.
It really implies that an object's holiness has a strict expiration date. Like the moment a symbol stops pointing past itself toward a higher truth and people just start staring directly at the symbol, it becomes a spiritual hazard. It becomes the exact thing the Second Commandment was engineered to prevent.
The cognitive ease of worshiping a physical piece of bronze simply overrode the difficult, abstract devotion required by an invisible God. The tangible object absorbed all the reverence meant for the intangible ideal.
And our source material does not let us leave this phenomenon safely quarantined in the ancient world. It forcibly connects the evolution of Nehushtan to a modern, recognizable symbol, requiring us to look at how this ancient psychological trap operates today.
Yeah, this is where it gets very provocative.
It does. But before we dive into this next section, I need to be incredibly clear with you, the listener. The commentary we're about to unpack makes very strong theological claims. We must explicitly state that we are not taking sides here.
Absolutely not.
We are not endorsing this religious viewpoint, nor are we condemning it. We are strictly reporting the author's argument as an exercise in understanding the source material. We are completely impartial.
Right. With that strict impartiality established, let's examine the author's final assertions. The text asks the reader to observe what Christians have done with the crucifix and how it relates to the above texts.
Okay.
It then concludes with a highly charged, definitive statement. Quote, Christ has returned and he is breaking the cultish idol of the Romans.
Wow. I mean, that is a massive, sweeping claim. How exactly does the author construct the structural parallel between a bronze snake in the desert and the crucifix?
Well, the author is mapping the exact narrative beats of the Nehushtan story onto the history of the cross. Let's look at the initial setup. In the desert, the Israelites were dying from venomous snake bites. Moses raised up a bronze snake on a pole, the very image of the thing killing them, and those who looked upon it were saved.
Right. That's the Exodus and Numbers part.
Exactly. Now, in Christian theology, humanity is dying from the venom of sin. Christ is raised up on a cross, which, remember, was a terrifying, secular Roman instrument of torture and execution. Believers are instructed to look to that sacrifice in order to be saved.
So the initial mechanism is identical. An instrument of brutal death is transformed into a vehicle for salvation. It forces the believer to look at the site of the suffering to find the cure.
The structure mirrors perfectly, but the author's critique hinges entirely on the second half of the historical pattern, that 700-year evolution into Nehushtan. The author argues that over the last 2 millennia, the crucifix has undergone the exact same psychological and theological distortion. Yes, what began as a stark reminder of a historical sacrifice, a brutal vehicle pointing toward a spiritual salvation, has evolved into a localized idol itself.
So the implication is that people today are metaphorically and maybe sometimes literally burning incense to the cross itself. They are seeking comfort or protection from the physical object, like the jewelry or the wall hanging, rather than the abstract divine concept it was originally meant to represent.
Precisely. Notice the deliberate, demystifying language the author uses. the cultish idol of the Romans.
Yeah, that stood out to me.
By framing the cross strictly as a Roman tool, the author is performing the exact same rhetorical move King Hezekiah used when he called the revered snake Nehushtan. The author is calling the cross just a piece of Roman wood. They are stripping away centuries of sanitized religious reverence to expose its raw secular origin.
And the culmination of the author's statement, asserting that Christ has returned and is breaking the cultish idol, forces Christ into the historical role of King Hezekiah.
That is the ultimate synthesis of the commentary. Just as Hezekiah had to violently demolish the bronze snake because it had evolved into a distraction from true worship, the author claims that a returning Christ is currently doing, or will do, the exact same thing to the crucifix.
Wow.
It is an argument that the symbol has vastly outlived its original healthy function and has metastasized into a spiritual roadblock.
You know, regardless of your personal theological beliefs or whether you find that parallel profoundly insightful or just deeply offensive, this is a fascinating psychological critique. It forces a really uncomfortable question about human cognition. Are we just hardwired to eventually worship the symbol rather than the concept it represents?
I think the overarching theme from Exodus through Second Kings, right to this modern critique, suggests that our capacity for abstract reverence is incredibly fragile. We inherently crave the tangible.
We do. We want things we can hold.
We want something we can touch, something we can carry in our pocket, something we can point to when we feel uncertain. But the inherent danger in lowering that cognitive load is that the physical proxy almost always ends up consuming the devotion. The vehicle permanently replaces the destination.
So we slowly transfer all the weight of our values, our faith, and our trust into a physical object. And eventually we forget what the object was actually supposed to point toward. And we just spend our lives polishing the outside of the brass key.
It is a cycle of utility decaying into idolatry, and it requires immense, painful self-awareness to recognize when an aid has become a crutch and when that crutch has evolved into an idol.
Well, we have covered massive ground in this deep dive. We started with an absolute terrifying divine law forbidding graven images, backed by the threat of generational spiritual debt.
Then we saw an immediate visceral exception in the desert, where a bronze snake on a pole served as a bizarre but effective psychological mechanism to cure venomous bites.
Right, and we watched that exact life-saving tool survive for 7 centuries, quietly evolving from a revered historical artifact into Nehushtan, an idol that people actively served. It literally had to be systematically smashed by King Hezekiah to restore true focus.
And finally, we unpacked a controversial modern critique applying that exact historical evolution to the crucifix, arguing that humanity is still caught in the very same psychological trap.
All of this brings us back to why this ancient paradox matters so deeply to you, the listener, right now. The core takeaway from this text is not just a history lesson about desert wanderings or a theological debate about crosses. It is a powerful, urgent reminder that meaning is never static. Our relationship with the objects, the traditions, and the symbols in our lives requires relentless critical thinking.
The text really challenges you to become your own Hezekiah. It asks you to audit the revered things in your own life and have the courage to ask if they are still functioning as vehicles or if they have quietly become destinations.
Yeah, and we've focused heavily on religious relics today, but this human tendency to idolize the tangible extends far beyond bronze snakes or wooden crosses. Think about the completely non-religious symbols anchoring your own life right now. Maybe it is your smartphone, sitting within arm's reach at this very second.
Or maybe it's that framed university diploma hanging proudly on your office wall.
Exactly. Or maybe it is simply the number you see when you log into your bank account. Every single one of those things started out as an incredibly useful tool. They were vehicles designed to connect you, to educate you, or to sustain your physical needs. They lowered the cognitive load of navigating the modern world.
But take a really close, unflinching look at them today.
Have any of those tools quietly, over years of daily reliance, evolved into your own personal Nehushtan, something for you to mull over as we end today? Ask yourself the hardest question of all. Is that object still something that serves you, or has it become something you now serve?